They thought she was just an old woman, fragile, harmless, and easy to push aside. But when a ruthless cartel stormed her ranch, smashing windows and firing guns, they had no idea whose home they had just invaded. Because behind that weathered face and quiet life was a legend, a retired special forces sniper whose eye had ended wars and whose name was once feared on battlefields across the world. That night, the hunters became the hunted, and the cartel learned too late that this elderly black woman wasn't their prey. She was their executioner. On a quiet stretch of land deep in the American South, where the sun bled gold over miles of rust-colored dirt and weather-beaten fences, an elderly black woman named Evelyn Mae Johnson lived alone on her ranch, a place the townsfolk thought of as just another forgotten patch of earth. But behind the silence of her weathered farmhouse, behind the slow shuffle of her boots across the porch, lay a story that nobody in town fully understood, for Evelyn was not merely an old widow tending to her cattle. She was once a legendary special forces sniper, a woman whose name was whispered in military corridors, whose eye behind the scope had ended wars before they could begin. Yet she had chosen a life of solitude after decades of violence, content to tend her land, sip her morning coffee, and remember her late husband who had once promised her peace. But peace has a cruel way of drawing the very storms it tries to escape, and on one blistering summer afternoon, that storm came roaring in the form of black SUVs, cartel men spilling out with rifles glinting under the sun, arrogant laughter cutting through the dry wind, for they believed this old woman's land hid routes they could use for smuggling, a perfect place for their empire to spread, and they thought her frail body and wrinkled face meant she was helpless prey, someone to scare, push aside, or bury without consequence. But Evelyn had spent her youth staring through scopes at men like them, and her instincts never dulled, so when the engines echoed across the valley and the birds scattered from the trees, her hands did not shake, her pulse did not quicken in fear. Instead it slowed, steady and precise, as she walked back into her farmhouse, opened an old chest beneath the floorboards, and pulled out the rifle that had once been her only companion in endless deserts and jungles, a rifle that still gleamed with quiet menace, polished by memories. And as the cartel spread across her ranch, laughing, smashing windows, spraying the air with bullets to show their power, Evelyn climbed to her roof, her knees stiff but her mind sharper than the scope she raised to her eye, and the first man to kick her barn doors open never even heard the shot before his skull cracked against the dust, his comrades whipping around in confusion, shouting in Spanish, firing wildly at shadows. But Evelyn had vanished into cover, moving like a ghost across her property, every shot deliberate, every movement calculated, her years of discipline pouring out in silence. And though they thought they were hunters, they quickly realized they had stumbled into a battlefield commanded by someone who had been forged in blood and fire, their bravado crumbling as one by one they fell, tires deflating, windshields shattering, men screaming as the invisible predator carved them apart from distances they couldn't fathom, until their leader, a man called Vargas with tattoos of skulls across his neck, bellowed in rage, swearing they would burn her house, drag her out, and make her beg. But Evelyn only smiled, whispering to herself words her old commander once told her. Patience is the deadliest weapon. And she set traps across her land, tripwires hidden in weeds, old dynamite buried near fence posts, memories of guerrilla warfare reborn in the soil of her ranch. And when the sun dipped low and shadows grew long, the night became her ally, for in the dark her enemies saw only ghosts, heard only whispers, and by dawn, the black SUVs burned in twisted heaps, the surviving cartel men crawling, bloodied and broken, begging for mercy, their arrogance shattered by an old woman they had mocked. And Vargas himself, cornered in the stable with smoke choking the air, dropped his gun when her shadow rose behind him, the cold barrel of her rifle pressing against his temple as she said in a voice steady as stone, "You brought war to my home. You forgot some of us were born for it." And though she could have ended him there, Evelyn chose a fate crueler for a man like him. She tied him, left him alive, and called the sheriff, delivering the cartel's butcher on a silver plate, shocking a town that had long thought of her as just another quiet widow. And when the story spread, when reporters swarmed and the world heard of an elderly black woman who single-handedly dismantled a cartel raid, Evelyn did not bask in the fame. She simply returned to her porch, cleaned her rifle, poured herself coffee, and watched the horizon as if waiting for the next storm. For though she longed for peace, she knew the truth. Legends never retire, they only wait. and should the world forget who she was, the cartel graves scattered across her land would always remember the night an old woman reminded killers what it meant to fear a sniper's eye.